Okay, so I still have a bit of a cold, and frankly, that reflects my mood at the moment. But perhaps that's a good thing because I feel that the most interesting videos, or at least the most honest videos online, are those which are spontaneous and very raw. Now, that's what I want this to be. Um, Here we go again. Here we go again. The last few days have felt particularly reminiscent of 2014, and it's given me a great sense of frustration and apprehension, if I'm being absolutely honest, about the future of this country, by which I mean the United Kingdom. The Nationalists had their party conference today in Aberdeen, and Nicola Sturgeon, of course, got the routine reception of all party leaders. I think she's as dominant a figure in the party now as Alex Salmond has been. And I will say this for her, I think she's a very skilled political operator in the sense that she knows how to toe her base. She knows how to push her, in my opinion, very, very, very divisive agenda whilst appearing to be, the diplomatic politician. But this goes well beyond Nicola Sturgeon, and it goes well beyond Theresa May. They're the two politicians most involved in this. It's somewhat like I mean, one thing about all of this is the feminists can't exactly keep talking about patriarchy. The two most influential the two most influential people in Britain today are two women, arguably. Obviously, the Chancellor is the second most powerful person, but the two most influential, May and Sturgeon. But like I say, this goes beyond personalities. Personalities do matter, but it goes beyond that. And it also goes beyond political parties. Now, there's a number of things I want to touch on. There's a lot of things I can talk about, but I find that pointing out the facts is a bit of a waste of time with nationalists. So, for instance, I could point out the fact, it's a basic fact, that over 2 million Scots voted in 2014 to stay in the United Kingdom on an 85% turnout. 85%, that's an exceptionally high turnout. I think the number approximately of those who voted for an independent Scotland at that time was 1.6 million. Now, people will say, what do raw figures matter? You should focus on percentages. So I think raw figures do matter because it puts things in context. 2 million people. Now, granted, some of those may have changed their mind in that time. For example, the actor Ewan McGregor, great actor, I have a lot of respect for him, but he said he's wavering now because of the Brexit issue. He hadn't been so keen on, this is the impression I got from the interview I saw, he hadn't been so keen on independence the first time around, but now wasn't so sure post Brexit. And he alluded to the fact that in the morning after Brexit, he would have voted for independence. Now, here's the thing, I'm going to play the devil's advocate for a second. I really do understand the feeling of frustration about Brexit. I am not a fan of Brexit. I'm certainly not a fan of hard Brexit. But there are certain misconceptions about unionists, and I want to address some of them as a unionist. Obviously, I don't speak for everyone, but I think a lot of unionists feel the same way I do. Number one, not every unionist is a little Englander. Not every unionist voted to leave the EU. It is not that simple. Just like not every Scot who voted Remain automatically supports independence. So we need to get away from that. This notion, this interlocking of Brexit and the independence issue. Of course, they overlap, but they're not the same issue. And I am convinced by the day that the SNP would be pushing for independence with or without Brexit. If there had never been an EU referendum, I'm convinced they would find a way to push for it. After all, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? They're the Scottish National Party. You know, they'd be letting themselves down if they didn't do it. It's what they exist for. What would be their purpose if they weren't pushing for independence? So I think Brexit is just a convenient sort of excuse for Nicola Sturgeon and her party. But, the issue about democratic mandate, I'm deeply frustrated with the arrogance that the nationalists have. Nicola Sturgeon was saying that she has shown compromise. What compromise? The only inkling of compromise I could see was that she somewhat stepped back on the timing issue, saying within reason she would accept it. How about her accepting Theresa May's position for once? She has absolutely refused to do that, just like she refused to do that with Theresa May's predecessor. Let's be clear, Theresa May is not Prime Minister of England. She's not Prime Minister of Scotland. She's not Prime Minister of Wales or Northern Ireland. She's Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And as such, she is head of government of the United Kingdom. So, as a starting point, now obviously I don't know what goes on in these private meetings. I'd love to be a fly on the wall. But the contempt that Nicola Sturgeon has shown from the start, I mean, put it this way, when the Prime Minister visited Holyrood, Sturgeon didn't even have the diplomacy to put out Union flags. So the arrogance of this party is already sending out the notion that Scotland is an independent entity from the rest of the UK. And it's this incredibly unhelpful propaganda, which sadly even some unionists are starting to tap into, some English unionists, that's and some English nationals for that matter. Actually, to be fair, it's probably more English nationals, but they're tapping into this idea that the SNP equals Scotland. They don't. They don't. Yes, they are currently the largest party. We'll see what happens in May, but the SNP does not equate to Scotland. Even broader nationalists, including other nationalist-leaning parties, I think the Scottish Greens are pro-nationalist. Even adding all them together, they do not equate Scotland. So let's say, for the sake of argument, there is fewer than 2 million people today who would back staying in the Union. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's 1.8 million. The fact is, you cannot ignore hundreds of thousands of people or treat the Scots like they are all one social entity. The SNP does it every time they do a BBC interview as representatives of Scotland. No, you're not. And certain English nationalists do it when they say, oh, I don't care if you Scots leave. I'm just as pissed off, frankly, with English nationalists and their narrow mind. There is so many questions with this. Not least the fact that both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon clearly said in 2014 it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now, you could say politicians say things all the time and do another thing all the time. That's typical political behaviour. But this goes well beyond that. We're talking about the very future of this state, of this country, of this United Kingdom. And the Prime Minister was absolutely right when she said it's not a game. I mean, what is going to happen if this referendum goes ahead and it once again, doesn't go the SNP's way? Are they going to find another way to push for a third referendum and a fourth referendum? When do they draw the line? Both the EU referendum and the last Scottish independence referendum were very tumultuous, exhaustive, and divisive events. The people of Scotland do not need a third. But this isn't just about the people of Scotland. This is also about the people of England, the people of Wales, and the people of Northern Ireland. Now, what happens if Scotland breaks away? We can hardly call ourselves a United Kingdom. There's going to be issues about the role of the sovereign. Is Scotland still going to be a monarchy? And if that's the case, then what are we going to call ourselves? What is going to be the name of this state? Because the natural follow-up of Scotland leaves would be that Wales would leave. And then what's Northern Ireland? What's Northern Ireland's role going to be? I mean, Sinn Féin's now the largest party. I haven't followed that as closely, ironically, given I'm from Ulster. But I'm from Ulster, I've grown up in England, and I have family in Scotland. This to me is not a simple issue, and it is not. There are some people who have a very parochial image, like us Scots, you English, us English, you Scots. For me, this is about my country, and I make no apology for that. I really don't care what the Nationals think of me. They can put me in the little box, but let me tell you something right now. I'm well travelled around the world. I've worked on the other side of the world. I've got friends from all cultures and all backgrounds. Sometimes, especially when people hear the Northern Irish accent, they automatically put you in their little box because there is a bit of a stereotype, a negative stereotype about Ulster um, unionists. Now, I'm not a unionist in the sectarian Northern Ireland sense. I have Catholic friends, but I'm a unionist in the sense of being pro UK, and I will not apologise for that. This is this is like, if you have your arm chopped off, you're going to miss it. That's how strongly I feel about this, and I make no apology for that. And I try to spend as little time arguing with nationalists as possible because it's frankly not good for my health, not good for their health either. Nothing I say will convince them, nothing they say will convince me, so what's the point? The only thing I care about is the best approaches to keep this United Kingdom together. But I believe the nationalists have created such a situation that now all the unionist parties in Scotland now have to fight among themselves, because if they don't, they will all be tarred as traitors to Scotland. That is what the SNP has done. And Nicola Sturgeon's smart, she's smart enough to send out this positive message. So she never ever, attacks the English or anything like that. But the base of Scottish nationalism, absolutely, absolutely, is deeply, deeply parochial in its thinking. I've seen this. All you have to do is look at any Scottish nationalist forum and you'll see what I'm talking about. The typical mentality, if you're Scottish Labour, if you're Scottish Tory, if you're Scottish Liberal Democrat, then you're a traitor to Scotland. That is how they see things. If you think I'm shit scary, check for yourself. I am not saying that every single Scottish nationalist is a terrible person, but I just cannot humour the idea of this country being broken up. And this idea that only the Scots can have a say, that's another piece of nonsense. Why the hell shouldn't the English, the Welsh, and the Northern Irish have a say? I mean, put it this way, if there's a divorce proceeding, it's not a case that one person's unhappy and they just leave and the other person doesn't get to have a say. There's a process, there's proceedings, it's talked out. The way the SNP talk is that the only people allowed an opinion are Scottish nationalists. Not even Scots, Scottish nationalists. But I do believe that the English, the Welsh, and the Northern Irish deserve a say, because these are going to be issues that will affect all of us. It goes without saying. Um, and in some ways, I wish there was a referendum tomorrow to get the damn thing over and done with. It's the uncertainty I find intolerable. But I believe the SNP is creating this uncertainty and this continued stagnation, this continued stalemate by disregarding the last referendum, totally showing contempt for it. I mean, they're placing a lot in their 2016 manifesto, but neither the SNP or devolved government or this process began last year with Brexit. There was a clear decision made in 2014. The SNP has shown utter contempt for that. And what about the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands probably, of Scots who live in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland? They can't have a vote. Now that seems wrong. If there is going to be another referendum, it seems only fair to me that they get a vote as well. I think there would even be a case, given that we are talking about the breakup of the United Kingdom, for every Briton to have a say on this. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, but it isn't just about Scotland. I love Scotland. Scotland's a great land. It's a great nation. And yes, I do acknowledge it's a nation with an identity, with its own culture. Wonderful, great. But you know what? In almost every policy area, it's devolved. Now, Gordon Brown's spoken about a federal system. I need to look more into that to see exactly what it entails, to see if I would go along with that or not. But Brown was a passionate unionist. He made a very passionate pro-union speech, which I believe helped to turn the tide in 2014. The bottom line is no one wants this. And to me, it just shows the tunnel vision of the SNP. Because Brexit just happens to be a convenient excuse for them. I mean, what about the Scots who voted to leave the EU? True, on that occasion, on that particular referendum, more Scots voted to remain, but there were many Scots who voted leave as well. And even those who voted remain didn't necessarily say we're voting to remain in the EU, but that means we're hostile to the UK, even now. But there is a bit of a warped logic in this. The SNP is trying to convince everyone that one political union is a terrible, awful thing, i.e., the 300-year-old political union with England. They try to convince everyone that's awful. And yet, as the Prime Minister pointed out today, they're trying to convince everyone, on the other hand, that a 40-year-old union based in Brussels, as far as I know, Brussels at least equal distance from Edinburgh, as is London, if not slightly more, that somehow is a better union. The SNP talk in these rosy terms like we're reaching out to the world, we're the ones thinking big. Ignore these little Englanders. These unionists are narrow-minded bigots. But what the SNP is doing is condemning Scotland to the wilderness. If you don't believe me, if you don't believe unionists, if you don't believe Theresa May, listen to EU chiefs, listen to Jose Manuel Barroso, listen to other EU leaders that have clearly said that Scotland would have to reapply as a new member state the way any other state would do. So if you're a pro-EU Scot, you know, the idea that you get independence and you suddenly rejoin the EU, it won't work like that. Why should it? Because like I said, then other member states, would-be member states like Bosnia, would say, well, wait a second, Scotland's jumping the queue. And they'd have a fair point. I'm not in favour of a hard Brexit. I do think that one negotiating strategy would be to say, look, there's certain areas where devolved power could perhaps have some sort of trade relations with the EU in a way that, from a devolved point of view. So I think that probably would be a sensible move by the Prime Minister. But I support her saying that this is not going to happen now. And I think Theresa May was smart about that. I mean, she frankly would have been well within her right to say you had the referendum 3 years ago. It was once in a lifetime. That's it. But she didn't even say that. She said not now. But when are we going to see the end of this? When are we going to see the end of this division? I mean, this did not exist. Certainly not on this scale 10 years ago. The last 4 years, really. Who's to blame? Some would say David Cameron should never have agreed to a referendum. Either of those referendums. You know, there's this notion referendums are a wonderful thing, but all I have seen is the creation of division, and it only seems to be getting worse. So, I'm not going to go out and attack nationalists and verbally lay into them. But what they are doing in Scotland is saying Scotland belongs to us. And if you're either a pro-union Scot or you're from any other part of the UK, you need to shut up. Scotland is part of the UK. So frankly, someone in the other three nations can identify as much with Scotland as they feel that instinctive Britishness, because that's what it is. I may not be Scottish by birth, but I am British. And as far as I'm concerned, that is a far older concept. And frankly, it breaks my heart. It saddens me and it frustrates me to see what is happening here. Nothing's even happened yet. The rhetoric is causing problems. That's without this damn thing even going ahead. And like I say, I almost wish it was tomorrow, because what we're going to have is 2 or 3 years of uncertainty. In fact, I'm starting to wonder, should the Prime Minister maybe have just said outright no? Let the SNP do all the grumbling and complaining and demanding and threats and all the rest of it. I really, really hope they lose seats in May. I really hope so. Because if they lose seats, it means, it's less likely they'll be in Holyrood, which means this damn divisive rhetoric will finally start to subside. And I'm not foolish. I know they're not going to quit. But they should understand that unionists aren't going to quit either. So if they want to fight, they need to understand that we're not going to be silenced. I'm not going to go to Scotland on a visit and say, oh, I better keep my mouth shut in case the nationalists are offended by, my opinions. I'm not going to go around with a megaphone and sing Rule Britannia. But I am not going to feel like a stranger in Scotland. No bloody way. Scotland is part of the United Kingdom. Scotland is a nation. Scotland is a wonderful nation. It's got its own culture, its identity, all of that. Wonderful. But it's part of the United Kingdom. It has been for 300 years. And just to put things in context for the romantics out there, 300 years, that is longer than most of the sovereign states in the world today. Think about that. I'll leave it there.